Welcome to Dreamseed VR. I'm your host, Sarah Finn, and today is a very special episode. It is the very first anniversary of Dreamseed. I'm going to do my best not to get teary-eyed, but as everybody knows, this has been a crazy year, and it's especially been a crazy year to try to launch the project of your dreams, which is what this is. So to just start out with, I want to thank everybody from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this, for tuning in, for lending me your eyes and your ears. This has been a wild, wild ride. See, I couldn't even get a minute in without turning into a baby, but truly, sincerely, thank you. It means the world to me that you guys share these cool ideas, these pieces of art, the fanship of an incredible genre, and watching a new culture go from being a science fiction genre to a reality. There's been a lot of really incredible stuff that's happened in the past year, and I got to admit, about halfway through the year, I lost my steam in terms of covering the news. So there are a few things that I definitely wanted to make mention of because I feel like they are highly significant to the things we discuss, and they would make a really great recap at the end of the year. So first and foremost, what comes to mind is the developments that have been coming out of Camp Elon. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Mr. Musk's crazy exploits, Elon Musk is the dude behind SpaceX, he's the dude behind Neuralink, he's the dude behind Tesla electric cars, and when he's not making electric cars or shooting rockets up into the sky, as we saw a fabulous rocket blow the up last week, he had made some incredible progress with his Neuralink project that he showcased some of the demos about 3 months ago. And they brought out 3 adorable piggies, the 3 little pigs, Gertie and her 2 friends, to demonstrate the Neuralink. Really exciting developments, especially considering some of the technologies that are showcased in a lot of current media. So we're also going to talk a little bit today about a game that was recently released that was long awaited throughout the course of this entire year, Cyberpunk 2077. We're going to talk a little bit about the origins of the game. We're also going to talk a little bit about the game itself, as well as some of the unique implications behind it. And I also wanted to dive a little bit into what I call Proto Cyberpunk. And the reason why I feel like that's significant is it's always culturally interesting to look at the roots of something, the progenitors of something. And in particular with this cool holiday season, I did myself a favor and I finally watched Die Hard for the first time ever. It was my Christmas movie, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. And in watching it, I also dug into some interesting details about some of the folks on the production, as well as some concepts that I couldn't help but think to myself, wow, this looks like Proto Cyberpunk. So those are some of the topics that we're gonna cover today in this extra long episode of Dreamseed VR. But to begin with, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a backstory as to where Dreamseed came from, where I feel like we're going, and just, behind the scenes look at how this thing came to be in my life as well as on your computer screen. So around Thanksgiving last year in 2019, I was enjoying watching Terminator with my family, which has become a funny holiday tradition since then. And I couldn't help but have kind of like a existential crisis when I decided to have a couple hits off a bowl of weed. I had quit smoking weed in that past year, and it had changed my brain chemistry to stop smoking weed. And so when I tried to smoke it again, I ended up having a panic attack of sorts, an anxiety attack. And rather than letting this thing get the best of me and make me feel really awful and uncomfortable, I decided I wanted to use the opportunity to dig into the root of that anxiety. I wanted to understand what was grabbing me by the boo-boo, you know? And so I did some deep thinking, and I had a moment that felt like Muad'Dib from Dune. And I felt like I could see through the valleys of time and into the long form scope of my life. And I realized that part of what my existential anxiety was about was me not feeling fulfilled in bringing what I felt was most important to the world. Like, if we all have a gift that we want to give, I felt like I was falling short of what I wanted to share with people. I've been an artist for as long as I could hold a pencil, since like age 5. And that's how I process the world. That's how I synthesize stuff and share my perceptions and my dreams with people, is through art. I also have a really impassioned intellectual side, and I wanted to find a way to better synthesize and share my thoughts with people who shared similar interests. So I thought to myself, if I were an object, kind of like taking a hint from weird salvia folklore in terms of, you know, people becoming inanimate objects in their trips. I'm not a particular salvia fan, salvia divinorum, but I thought to myself, if all of us are kind of like functional parts of the universe, or like little specialized cells, what kind of specialized cell would I be? What is my function? What do I do? And I realized that in part, what I like to do is synthesize culture, is to make connections between ideas and share them with people. And so I thought, what is that object? What's the object that represents that? What's the piece of the puzzle that I could share? And I realized that would be sort of a magazine, kind of like a cultural aggregate, whether that is an old school magazine or a new school kind of digital magazine. I realized that I had not only a lot of sort of like entertainment, cultural information and synthesis, but there were lots of cool philosophical ideas that I had come across over the years that I thought would be relevant for people, as well as psychedelic and alchemical historical stuff. So that was essentially the genesis of Dreamseed. I realized that I wanted to produce a magazine, and I wanted this magazine to be a bridge between the old world and the new world, between old media, like paper magazines, the in-between being web pages and things like that, and then into the immersive media that I saw happening with virtual reality. So that, in a nutshell, is how Dreamseed was born in Thanksgiving of 2019. I spent the next month organizing my thoughts about it and coming up with different themes for episodes, and I launched it at the very end of the year in 2019. Now, as all of us know, something very strange happened at the very beginning of January in 2020, and I felt like there was this deep sense of heavy irony right after I produced the New Year's episode, which, if I remember right, was the second episode of Dreamseed. We did our inception episode, which is like, you know, ethos, the beginning, and then I did the New Year's special. Pardon me. So as soon as I had finished producing that, I was going through the news the next day, and I followed a lot of independent YouTube folks, some of which had lived in China for many years, and others who had connections to the medical industry in China, and I caught wind of this thing that was happening in, I don't really want to say keywords, you can understand why. And I thought to myself, this is going to be a really hard year. This is going to be a really hard time to launch this project. And I knew that it was going to take a while for the rest of the world to figure out how big a deal it was. I have my own opinions about the situation, and to be quite honest, I'm going to be shifting a lot of the videos I produce to other platforms, so I'll be able to more share in depth some of my feelings and opinions about the current state of the world. But long story short, I saw that writing on the wall immediately after launching my second episode. So that was extremely heavy, and I did my best to hold my head above water and keep producing. And about halfway through the year, the lockdowns and the isolation and just the starkness of it really started to get to me, and I lost my motivation to cover news stories, as I mentioned before, which is really difficult because it's been an exciting year in VR. We saw the launch of Quest 2. We saw, lots of games come out. Half-Life came out in VR, if I recall, and we had multiplayer with Beat Saber come out. Quest 2 outsold Quest 1. There's lots of really exciting stuff. Carmack left Facebook to pursue AI development, and there were lots of weird things going on with Facebook as far as, its connections to Oculus and how the account syncing was booting a bunch of people off Oculus because they had their accounts compromised with Facebook. So it was just like a news-packed year, and I really just turned away from covering that stuff and focused more on the thing that kind of keeps me going is storytelling. I wanted to focus on covering things that made me happy, the things that I enjoyed, things that I thought you would enjoy. Stuff like Max Headroom, stuff like me producing green screen performance fusions, especially in the face of having to sort of walk away from being a in-person performance artist with this whole situation. There aren't any real-life gigs for a lot of us. And just focusing on virtual performance and art in that regard. So I just wanted to give you that recap as a way of saying thank you for your patience and faith in my project during that time, and that it's been a really squirrely circumstance to try to bring a project with the scope that I have in mind for Dreamseed into the cultural fold. So thank you for that. That's been, it's been both a blessing and a source of anxiety, because I always want to bring my best foot forward to the episodes that I make. But I also know that in order for me to bring you content as frequently as I'd like, that I'm likely going to have to step back from some of the in-depth aspects in some ways. Like in future episodes, you might not see me as dressed up and crazy, like it took me a minute to do this fabulous eye and this stupid eye makeup and just whatever. As you can see, I am potentially hiding a huge zit on the side of my nose with a cute Hello Kitty Band-Aid. Whereas in the past, I might have postponed a show by an entire week because I didn't want to show you guys me looking frumpy or me looking drained or me looking zitty and gross, It's like I'm human, just like all the rest of you guys. And I'm going to get sappy and emotional because, it's really vulnerable to be a talking head. It's very vulnerable to think like, I'm going to host a show and get in front of however many people. Some of my episodes have had nearly, 500 to 1,000 views. And granted, that's exactly what I want. I want to reach a lot of people, but it puts you in a vulnerable place to, I don't have a makeup crew. I don't have a production crew. I do all of this by myself. So And a lot of times it takes quite a while to write a script. So the reason why I wanted to do this longer form episode where I just kind of talk about these things off the top of my head is because it's actually going to give me more freedom to bring you more information in a way that is more intimate, in a way that's more personal. And granted, there will be some light editing on this episode. I'll do my best to create timestamps. So if you're not able to sit down with me for however long this ends up being, whether it's an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, I want you to be able to just like jump into the parts of our conversation that interest you the most. And that is my goal, is to do this more often, to do it a little bit more ad lib, and to connect ideas that come to me on a more personal level rather than having it be super curated. Because over the past couple weeks, I've been finding lots of really amazing connections in things that I would not normally have found had I been doing it in a more like linear research fashion. So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about Cyberpunk 2077. So, warning, we're going to talk about our favorite stuff, illicit things, right? And this comes with a little bit of a warning. I'll use some acronyms or analogies or whatever. That way we can talk about them, and hopefully nobody gets pinged for being naughty on whatever platform I launch this. So for those of you who are on the alternative platforms, you might get the full story. For those of you watching it on YouTube, you might have to check out a link I'll put below to see the unadulterated version of this. So forgive me for jumping back and forth between potential edits. I have a sip of my energy here. Long story short, I decided it would be hilarious to play Cyberpunk 2077 for the first time as a party to myself, a graduation celebration. Your girl is now a Bachelor of the Arts in Intermedia Arts, focusing on projection performance art, and then I've later integrated that into this lovely medium, virtual reality. And I wanted to do and play Cyberpunk 2077. So I arranged that. That was done. I conquered. I failed miserably at a few tutorials, and my gameplay was abysmal. I am not somebody who plays video games. I played them as a kid, and then as soon as I realized that I could go to festivals and eat psychedelics and spin fire, not always at the same time, I realized that life was my video game, and I didn't really want to play games anymore. But at the same time, I know that this video game is very special, that the game itself has been in production for somewhat like 8 years now. And not only that, but it is based on a role-playing game, much like in the style of Dungeons and Dragons, but it was created in the 90s. And so this game has an incredibly rich history. And the guy who wrote it has so much content as far as the storytelling and the characters, the development, all the different concepts that the role-playing game touches on. All of those were lovingly crunched into the story of this game, 2077. The original one, if I recall right, is Cyberpunk 2020, which is really cool, and I can see why they wanted to release it in 2020. The release was mired in lots of drama for those who had it on pre-order and were anticipating it, because there were lots of development bugs that they had to work out, which is totally understandable. From what I understand, The Witcher, another video game title of similar scope and depth, was mired in silly glitches as well. But after a few patches, all that stuff was ironed out, and people are really happy with The Witcher, from what I see. So I, like many people, had been sort of keeping tabs on Cyberpunk 2077 for the better part of this past year. And it was pushed back several times. And a lot of people were upset, whereas a lot of other people understood the nature of development. understood that it's not just a tug of war between developers and the guys upstairs, but that, you know, they want to put the best possible game out there for release. And so, you know, between that tug of war, we finally got our release a couple weeks ago. And there were definitely some problems that people were facing with the different systems they were running it on. It seems like several of the consoles had a hard time chugging such a heavy game. I'm very lucky, and another bit of my Dreamseed VR backstory is that I lived in a roach motel in Hawaii in 2018 for about a year, and Hawaii is a gorgeous place, and I had a lot of amazing experiences there, but I also lived in as close as you can get to abject poverty in Hawaii. So when people think like, oh, you lived in Hawaii, it's like, yes, I did. I got the same gorgeous sunsets that all the rich people did, but in reality, I lived in a roach motel. You know, I lived in a really crummy condo, and there were cockroaches this fucking big I shared the damn condo with. And to get by, I scrubbed toilets at the Airbnbs of the same condo complex, had some apartments and stuff that were really well refurbished inside. So whereas mine was super old and gross and crummy, there were some of them that were close to like, you know, fancy stars. I mean like 4-star, you know, not movie stars or whatever. But some of them were very nice inside. And the people who owned those refurbished units would often rent them as Airbnb spots. And so, And so I often would clean those units for one of my neighbors who was a cleaning lady. And that was how I made a lot of side money. Not like a lot, but you know, that was what I did for the majority of the year as my side work. And I also did some caregiving for a wonderful older woman who lived in the same complex. And between those two jobs and giving up every vice I ever had, no tea, no coffee, no boba. I think I had shaved ice twice that year. I'm not even joking. I gave up every single teeny tiny vice for a year and saved all of my money so I could eventually build a beast of a desktop so I could get into virtual reality. I want to give a shout out to my best friend. You know who you are. She helped me with my last chunk of resources to make that dream happen. And her generosity lives on in every single episode. She is a huge inspiration to me. She's an amazing producer and artist and huge heart. And, you know, she even took me to swim with dolphins in Hawaii when I lived there. So thank you. You know who you are. I'm not going to out you by name in this episode, but you know who you are. But truly, Dreamseed wouldn't exist without her. So every episode you see, thank my angel donor bestie for making that last gap evaporate between me and that VR dream. So the reason I bring it up is because without a machine that powerful, I wouldn't be able to do this work that I bring you guys. I wouldn't be able to make this stuff in VR. And I wouldn't have been able to run Cyberpunk 2077. It's almost as if the game is so heavy and crazy. Pardon me, I need a tissue. I love you, bestie. Damn. So I wouldn't be able to run that game without the graphics card that's on my machine. Now, I'm not very good at talking about specs. I'm kind of a cave lady in that regard when it comes to tech, but I do know I run an NVIDIA 2080. It's not a TI. It's not the top end of that family. It's the one below that. At the time, there were a lot of people figuring out that you could do crypto trading on these really powerful video cards. And so even though I initially got the video card for a very good price, the price immediately jumped right after they were released because traders put a really huge pressure on supply and demand for that. You guys are getting the very intimate episode this time, so pardon me for being like way too human, but that's why it's the anniversary special, right? So I got really high and I played Cyberpunk 2077, and it felt so weird because I had all of these amazing insights that I want to go into. But to begin with, it's kind of like you have base reality, which you take for granted is base reality. And then you augment your perception of that base reality, because in actuality, everything that we see, taste, hear, touch, whatever, is a reconstruction of the data that comes in from our sensory organs. So you never actually experience reality directly. If we want to get really fancy about it, Plato's allegory of the cave is kind of like the very first representation of augmented reality, because he understood that everything that we see is illusory, that everything that we see is basically that shadow play on the wall of the cave, and the cave is the metaphor for your mind, right? And in that way, like what we think of as base reality is a reconstruction. So when you throw a chemical in there, in particular like because it's a psychedelic dissociative, it's going to radically alter the way your brain is compiling that sensory composition, right? And for me, on a personal level, I feel like it makes reality feel like a video game. It makes it chunky in like big blocks of sensory input. I get a weird kind of vibration, like almost like noise, and I feel it in my hands in particular. It's kind of like a numbing noise, like wow, 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 wow. It's almost like an oscillation. And so being kind of a step back from my own perceptions with this crazy whompage, I was looking at the video game, and it seemed like I was experiencing my perception through a pane of glass, and then the video game itself was almost like a window into another reality. Pardon me, I'm going to be wiping my nose a lot. What was particularly silly about this attempt was I thought that I was going to be clever, and I thought that I was going to download Vorpix, which is a program that lets you play your regular desktop games in virtual reality. There is a settings for Cyberpunk 2077. I hear there's a few different potential settings that you can use, but unfortunately it didn't really work. And I had my headset on. I like to use a Rift in VR. I do have a Vive, and I have used Quest. I've got a Quest, but I find that Oculus Rift is really lightweight. It has good graphics, and it's a nice in-between of everything for me, because I don't want a heavy system on my head and my face, because it pulls me out of the suspension of disbelief if I have to deal with a bunch of weight on my neck. So we tried the Vorpix, and it was so f***ed up, you guys. It was so brutal. It's basically a screen in VR, and then the screen is just close enough to your face that it looks like it's kind of first person, right? So it's not truly to the peripheral. It's not all the way to your edge of perception. It was so chunky. It was like trying to go into like Lawnmower Man on acid. It was so ridiculous. And I think, man, I might have caused some neurological damage trying to make that work. I was so stubborn, and I had my companion try on the headset so they could see, you know, what I was seeing, and they were like, oh my God, this is insane. It's way gross, way chunky. Didn't work. So rather than just, you know, smash my face against the brick that was the bad Vorpix thing, I decided that I would just play from my desktop display, which I've got a really decent monitor. It's got good resolution, and my graphics card ran gorgeously. I only ever once or twice came across a simple flash of the T-pose that people were talking about, that glitch. And it was when the car was driving like 130 miles an hour down the road. You'd see her like T-pose right in the middle of driving. So some of the other interesting things that came up philosophically with the gameplay was I was having a conversation with a friend of mine over in Europe, just like, chatting online. And they asked me, they're like, so do you construct your characters ever to be dudes? And I thought to myself, no, I don't. Because I'm not only am I a chick, but the way society works, most of the time, the main protagonist is a dude. And for me, until there's more character context, he just reads to me as like the everyman. And I don't really have much in common with the everyman. Not just on a gender level, but like a personality level, and an interest level, and a personal history level. So for me, it's not as engaging to play a character that's designed as a dude. And then my friend asked me, oh, well, when you play a female character, does it feel more like you are that character or that you're role playing that character? And I thought about it, and I couldn't help but think to myself, like, no, I'm just role playing that character. Like, I don't personify myself as that character, if that makes sense. I don't think that she's me running around. I'm not like running around being like, it's Seraphin. When I play Cyberpunk 77, I'm playing V. Like, that V is not Seraphin. And I only say that because there's so much about that character's development and stuff that's not compatible, obviously, with my personal history. And so, and I think that kind of goes into cosplay a little bit too. There might be some aspects that you can relate to a character in, or that you admire about a character, but you don't really think of yourself as that character. So that was interesting. I thought that was kind of cool. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about might have slight spoilers. So if you're pseudo-religious about not having things spoiled, you might want to skip ahead to some of the content that we're going to cover regarding Die Hard and other Proto Cyberpunk. But for those of you who don't mind little background details, most of this isn't really going to spoil any major plot points. So just a heads up. Some of the things that I found really cool and interesting about Cyberpunk 2077 is that the setting is in a fictional city in California called Pacifica. For those of you who actually lived in California at any point, in particular the Bay Area, there is a Pacifica. I think it's like just south of San Francisco on the one. So there is a real Pacifica, but this one is set in Southern California. And I thought it was really interesting that the different character arcs of the game are divided by socioeconomic class. And class warfare tends to be a pretty big theme in most cyberpunk. And it tends to be divided along the lines of international corporations. And it sort of blurs the lines between what is a nationality and what is a corptocracy, that kind of vibe. They seem to live like on the outskirts of the city. They live a much more Mad Max lifestyle than the other classes in the game. And then you have the street kids, which are, for lack of a better way of describing it, they're sort of the middle class. And I find it interesting that, granted, there's a lot of crime throughout all of the different classes, and I'll mention the upper class in a minute, but it seems like one of the few ways for characters to maintain their financial autonomy in the middle class, which seems to be quite a bit of struggle, is the street kids are involved in a lot of underground crime. And a lot of that crime brings them into associations with the back dealings of the upper class, which does mirror reality when you think about it, whether that's through the drug trade or the sex work trade and other illicit things that I want to steer away from talking about explicitly. But I just found it really interesting that this game was able to talk about those issues in such a gritty, visceral way that very much sidesteps a lot of the censorship that you would see in traditional media forms like television or movies, or even in music, or I don't know, like books, those weird paper things that old people used to read. Anyway, so the upper class is called the corpos, or just the corpse, you know? I don't know. Corpse, corpos, same difference. Sounds creepy, right? Of course, the root word is like cooperative and corporeal, whatever. But when you think about it, like, yeah, it does kind of sound like corpse. Sounds like corpse, doesn't it? It's kind of weird. So this game was really brilliant in its handling of the nuance in those different classes. How the street kids look like they might be, you know, more well off or sophisticated than the nomads, but they also have to operate more within the structures of Night City itself and the corpos and their power structure. Some of the thematics in the game, and here's a little bit of, like, you know, I was saying, spoiler alert, there's a lot of themes that revolve around the digital transfer of consciousness. And that's something that we also saw in Altered Carbon, that not only the book, but the Netflix series that came out like 2 years ago, something like that. I found that interesting because that's sort of been the backbone of the transhumanist movement for a long time. Those of you who are familiar with transhumanism and the work of Ray Kurzweil, he's obsessed with a sort of digital immortality. And the linchpin of that is how to transcend organic death, how to sort of take the substance of the human psyche and consciousness and crunch it into a digital matrix that can be uploaded or transferred. So that's a thing. It's pretty interesting to dovetail that with some of the news that we recapped earlier in this episode regarding the year 2020, in particular the work that Elon Musk was doing with Neuralink. Now I'm going to relate that work in a little bit to a guy named John C. Lilly, who was doing a lot of research not only with humans communicating with dolphins, but he also did a lot of research into the nature of how the mind structures itself in systems and system dynamics. So put like a little bookmark in that, just like, we're going to talk about John Lilly, because it definitely relates later with a lot of other stuff. I'm going to be like Charlie from It's Always Sunny, and I'm going to have my billboard, and I'm going to leave all the strings connecting things in a conspiracy theory, so put your seatbelts on. Some of the other thematics that I thought were really interesting is the idea of corporate colonialism. Now, this seems to be a furthering and deepening of the idea of neo-colonialism. I'll go ahead and put like a little graphic that describes what neo-colonialism is. It's basically using free market forces to enact the control mechanisms that you would from a traditional colonial society. And the reason why I thought that was interesting, in particular with this story, is that there seems to be a cultural conflict as well as fusion between not just Asian culture, but specifically Japanese culture and Latinx culture in this Southern Californian fictional city, Pacifica. And if you are to look at the native population, which would be the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Indigenous, Mestizo culture, those people are being subjugated through the corporate colonialism of the Japanese corporations. I forget the name of the corporation. Asaka, whatever. It's cool. It starts with an A. It's this like kind of mob-like Japanese hotel corporation that also dabbles in biotech. It's like a crazy conglomerate. Like imagine like, Google, Amazon, whatever. It's those folks, right? So the culture clash and fusion of those two cultures in Pacifica is really interesting. And some of the other things that I found pretty compelling, especially after having done some study for the last bit of my degree, is how a lot of the sort of stereotypical characters and roles that you would find in American cinema for Latino characters, like the gangbanger or the boxer or, the hypermasculinity, the machismo. I found it really interesting how they were able to subvert those ideas by giving them a very nuanced and humanized character. So rather than it just be a surface glaze to exotify a character, they were able to give depth to why those characters act the way they do or engage in the professions or the behavior sets that would be stereotypical of those characters, right? And I am so impressed with how naturally they handled the diversity of characters. It was not cheesy or spoon-fed or placative at all. It was very naturalistic. It just lent itself well to the atmosphere of the place and the culture. You would see characters that had like little bits of hints towards their spirituality, like there would be like a cross on this guy's cyberpunk pants, and I would be like, he's a good Catholic boy at heart, right? Or just little things like that I found super interesting that blended the cultures. You'd see some like samurai whatever influence in one corporate bit, and then the next bit you're at a Ripper Doc's office and you see De los Muertos little skulls on the shelf. I'm sorry, I don't say that well. I'm painfully white. But the ideas of mortality and honor and like very much hypermasculinity for a lot of the characters, it was just interesting how it was handled. So, without getting too weird or meta about it, that was something that I found myself repeatedly going like, wow, while I was really high playing the game. Yeah. So that was just like a random side note as far as us being psychedelic explorers in virtual reality, right? Because that's why we're here. That's what this channel's about. While I was super loaded, I couldn't help but think about something I had read that morning about the history of pooping in space. Now, I told you this was going to be a non-linear, like connect the dots weird shit, right? I couldn't help but be super fascinated with the idea of being a biological being and like flinging yourself into an environment completely outside the parameters that you evolved in a place where the physics of your environment don't behave in ways that are compatible with your biological set, your vehicle, your meat puppet. And I found it really interesting to learn that when they initially were going to go up into space, they didn't know that they were going to be there for long enough that relieving oneself was going to be an issue. They thought they'd just pop up, be out there for 15 minutes and come back down. But because the guy who was going to be thrown into space, he had to wait something like 45 minutes, almost to an hour before he was going to be blasted out, that he was like, oh my God, you guys, I have to poop, pee, whatever. I think he was just had to piss himself. And so he asked ground control, he's like, can I just pee? And it was funny because they had to confer between the engineers of the suit as well as the doctors and a couple other folks to give him the go-ahead. And part of that was because they were afraid that there was a possibility he could electrocute himself, pissing himself, right? And so they eventually gave him the okay. They're like, yeah, you can pee yourself. And so he did. The first dude up into space, like, wet himself before going. So, like, he went up a soggy monkey. Anyway, so yeah, that guy had to piss himself. But it became even weirder because they didn't know if you could even swallow up there, right? Just they thought that gravity would affect the way you not only pee or poo, but the way you swallow. So initially they would use these little, kind of like a condom. It was like a little sleeve that you would put on your junk, a dude, right? It was designed for males. And a lot of the astronauts were kind of fibbing about the size that they needed. And you would definitely think that they would foresee this and just get a measurement, right? But no, they took these guys' word for it, and they were like, I need a large. It's like, no, you don't, bro. And because of that, they would slip off, and like piss would go everywhere. And I didn't understand that a lot of the early space missions were so foul biologically. I didn't realize that like they were dealing with leaks with fecal matter, that they were dealing with urine like floating up in the cab and stuff like that. Apparently they tried to create a system where they would have a little valve and it would go outside the spacecraft, and you would have to time it right with the vacuum, because if you did it too early, you know, there would just piss would go everywhere. If you did it too late, the vacuum of space would like grab your manhood. So that was really weird. And then they decided like, oh, we're going to send some women up into space, and they had to think. They're like, oh, what do we do? They don't have dicks, so they decided to just do a good old-fashioned diaper, which doesn't sound fun, does it? Just like pooping and shitting yourself. But apparently they had to like tape bags, and this is both sexes. They had to tape bags to their asses and just poop in bags. But for those of you who've seen Apollo 13, I guess one of the dudes got really sick, right? And they didn't really get into why in the movie, but apparently he got sick because at some point ground control had told them that they needed to not like be releasing their bodily waste out of the ship, right? There was like stuff going on. And so they were like, you need to stop that. But they didn't say that it was not indefinite. Okay, they didn't give them like, okay, you can do it now again. Unfortunately, they just let them think that they had to continue that protocol. And so dude kept just filling up the little like compartments that are designed for that in his suit. But unfortunately, he was basically like bathing in pee. Oh, sorry if my audio is weird. There we go. Maybe I fixed it. So unfortunately, he ended up getting a gnarly kidney infection. So the reason why I bring this up is because here I am, like, blasted the fuck out, and I can't help but be thinking about the nature of biological entities going to realms where their biology is not compatible with the physics set. So in a way, I kind of related to the strangeness of that, sort of being half in, half out of my body, playing this video game. Because in a way, like, I was trying to emulate more immersion into the video game by fucking with my set, you know, the perception of my base reality. So that was a weird train of thought I had while really high. But I definitely think that it's relevant when thinking in terms of human beings going to other psychedelic dimensions as well. Like, in what ways that our consciousness was designed to be sort of like the tank controller of a biological system, and then taking it and just like shoving it into some other sort of ethereal dimension. You know, what parts of that are going to be vestigial, what parts are going to be more easily translated, and what kinds of psychological processes are going to be a hindrance to us being able to function in new psyche spaces. So that was kind of the thought train there. So let's jump into a little bit more weird stuff with Cyberpunk 2077. So this game is chock full of references to other cyberpunk culture, which I thought was super fun to just kind of like, you know, weave through the game and see all these connections. Some of the simple ones are going to be like the presence of a jazz radio station. Like, you're in 2077, who the hell is going to be listening to jazz, right? You've got super grindy cyberpunk soundtrack, and then out of nowhere you get some weird jazz. That's definitely a nod to Blade Runner. Blade Runner had a 40-year nostalgia cycle reference to film noir stuff, like, you know, old detective, private eye kind of films, but also the music of the era. So there's lots of jazz, sad, forlorn, beautiful jazz in Blade Runner. And there's even some treatment to that effect in how Vangelis worked the soundtrack, especially in songs like Memories of Green, or not so much Rachel's Song. Rachel's Song is a beautiful piece of work. Definitely go check that one out. But yeah, so much the same way that there were really dope radio stations in Grand Theft Auto, they had lots of cool radio stations in 2077. And that jazz radio station is a nod to Blade Runner, as well as things like, you know, the noodle bars and a lot of the aesthetic. One of the characters is definitely a nod to Pris. If I remember right, it's Jackie's girlfriend. And she's got like the short blonde bob with the choker, spike collar, and the like the fuzzy jacket vibe. And so she is very much Pris, the android from Blade Runner. And then you have another character. It's like Elaine Parker. She has blue hair and is sort of a nod to Joy, who is a holographic artificial girlfriend from Blade Runner 2049. So those are just a couple examples of some cool nods the developers had towards that stuff. But I have a very special Easter egg for you guys. So special, I might even put a little like timestamp here. So for those of you who are really nerdy, you might already be aware that our home dude, Philip K. Dick, was very much into a kind of theology and spiritual philosophy called Gnosticism. We've covered Gnosticism in previous episodes of Dreamseed, and I lost my shit when I saw this Easter egg. So when you're interacting with this AI cab program named Delamar, there's a moment when you're at the Delamar headquarters and you're conversing with him, and he makes reference to a character. At this point in the game, I have not met this character. It's just a name that they used, right, for the dialogue. But I'm like reading the dialogue. I might include a screen cap just so you can see. The writers and developers straight up made reference to an American religious historian who conducted extensive research into Gnosticism named Elaine Pagels. Elaine Pagels wrote the Gnostic Gospels, which was, a breakdown of the Nag Hammadi. I hope I said that right. Whatever. Nag Hammadi. A bunch of documents that are from pre-biblical Christianity. What I mean by that is like these were the oral stories that were circulating for about 100 years or so after the immediate death of the guy we know as Jesus. And it was before the church formed and gathered all of the official stories and edited them together. So these were kind of like the secret, forbidden versions of the stories that they had to hide from the church as it was forming because they were considered heretical. They were like the uncensored versions. And they were all hidden in some jars and tucked away in some caves. And these guys in Egypt, I don't remember what year, I want to guess it was like the 30s, I could be wrong, but these guys were hiding in the hills because they had just avenged the murder of their father, and they were hiding from the baddies, who wanted to kill them back for avenging their dad. And they found this jar, but they were afraid that a jinn lived inside, which is, the old school word for genie. And so they were afraid to open the jar. But then when they learned that there might be something valuable inside archaeologically, and that they potentially could make a butt ton of money on it, they decided to just risk it and open the jar. And that was when they found all of these documents. And there's some really interesting things in there. There's like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. There's a poem called Thunder Perfect Mind, which is from the perspective of the divine feminine. And a lot of the Gnostic understandings of pre-Christianity come from this text, whom our badass Elaine Pagels did a lot of research into. She's also a professor at Princeton University. Elaine Pagels. So when I saw her name, I lost my shit. Like, my nerd barometer just went full tilt, and I was like, oh my God, these developers, they know what's up. They're big nerds. They're big Gnostic Philip K. Dick nerds. Of course they would be. So that was a fabulous Easter egg. And then I also saw cool references. For those of you who are familiar with Strange Days, we also covered Strange Days in a previous episode of Dreamseed. There is a sort of like brain scan that is strikingly similar to what you call a brain dance in 2077. So those are some of the dope references. I also heard from a homie that the creator of Metal Gear is featured in the game. I don't know if it's by name, but it's definitely like a character designed after his likeness. Hideo Kojima. I hope I said your name right. I'm sorry, dude, if I said it wrong. Not that you'd watch this little teeny tiny channel. But yeah, so he is paid homage to as well for his work on Metal Gear Solid, I'm guessing. I'm not a gamer, so I've never played Metal Gear, but I know many people who love it, who espouse how deep and badass and metaphysical the story is. So I can see the huge influence it's been on video game culture as a whole, and it's really cool that they paid homage to him. So yeah, now I'm going to go ahead and dive into some other weird tangential stuff regarding Cyberpunk 2077. Now, if you look at the dude that they have play Johnny Silverhand, right? His first name is Johnny, and that's like, hello, that's a pretty big nod to another role that Keanu Reeves did in the cyberpunk genre, and that is Johnny Mnemonic. I always say it wrong. It starts with an M, but I don't know if it's silent. So Johnny Mnemonic, whatever. Johnny's a courier, so he basically transports data in his head, right? And, without spoiling too much plot stuff, there are a lot of similarities between the job that Johnny does and the fate of Johnny Silverhand. And it's really interesting because in Johnny Mnemonic, they have a really big nod to a guy named John C. Lilly. And they do this through a character who's non-human. It's a dolphin in Johnny Mnemonic. And this dolphin is a ally and friend of, I guess, I don't know if you can call him a friend, whatever. He's trapped in a damn tank. But this dolphin's a badass because he like swims through the net and helps them hack stuff, right? So the reason why this is a connection to John Lilly is because John Lilly was funded by NASA back in the day to do research with communicating with dolphins. And at one point they were feeding the dolphins acid. You heard me right. They were giving dolphins LSD and trying to teach them how to speak English. So I'm going to include a bunch of weird links in the description. One of them is going to be an interview with the woman who was working with a dolphin named Peter, and she was trying to teach Peter English, and there's just like hilarious footage of Peter trying to talk out his blowhole up here. Trigger warning, there's some really weird stuff. Apparently Peter had a lot of sexual frustration as a dolphin stuck in a tank during this research. And rather than go through the really tedious process of transporting him to the other tank to hang out with his girlfriends, they decided to manually relieve him of that tension. And so, yes, they like whacked off dolphins on LSD. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm just a historian. I'm a humble historian telling you what happened. But yeah, there's interesting interview stuff where the woman talks about that. I don't even know where to start with that. That's just fucking weird. But yeah, it's history. So John Lilly wrote a book called Programming the Human Biocomputer. And we're going to cover that book a little bit more in depth in future episodes. But I wanted to just like give us the basic gist that he was doing research for the government in, unfortunately, I'm pretty sure it was related to like MK Ultra shit, that it was related to like weird CIA crap where they wanted to like program human minds and manipulate them in like nefarious ways. And to be quite honest, like I want to have one of my best friends on the show sometime very soon. David J. Brown is an incredible, how do I sum this brilliant dude up in just a few words? So he's an interviewer. He's a psychedelic genius. He's also a historian of psychedelic culture, and he's written some fabulous science fiction books of his own. The reason I bring it up is because he's a treasure trove of historical knowledge regarding psychedelics, but he was also good personal friends with John himself. And so if we get lucky enough, we'll have David on very soon in the beginning of this next year. And I want to ask him some questions about John's journey from being somebody who worked for the government with these things to becoming a proponent of individualized psychedelic expansion. Just how you go from, working for the dude to being like, individual thought is paramount and like spiritual development, whatever. So I found that really relevant, that you've got that connection between the dolphin research, the psychedelics, programming the human biocomputer, going back to the dolphin and Johnny Mnemonic and Keanu Reeves, going back to Cyberpunk 2077. And it seems like John Lilly's work is particularly interesting because he was very much into ketamine exploration. And I was getting some fierce vibes, like in a good way, but regarding his ability to have insights regarding the way human minds evolved as system dynamics. The way that ketamine felt like a damn real world video game when I was really high. So we'll get into that, as well as more stuff about the dolphin research in future episodes. But now that I've had your attention for so long, I think we're going well into our second hour. Thanks for being here. It's more like a long stream at this point. So rather than like a video, just pretend like it's a, post-edited stream, because we will be doing more live streams in the near future. We're going to go into Proto Cyberpunk. We're going to go into our favorite holiday action film, Die Hard. Now, Die Hard, I don't even know where to start. So it's like a late 80s, early 90s film. I'll put a little thing here so we can be more specific about it. But it's interesting to me because it almost felt like a prequel to Cyberpunk 2077. I'm not even joking. It's set in LA, which is obviously the analogy that they were using for Pacifica, right? You have a huge Japanese hotel being constructed, very much like the big giant Japanese hotel in Cyberpunk 2077. You have a lot of digital interfaces for databases and structures within the hotel that's being constructed. And you also have lots of Japanese culture present, but also like really fancy indoor terrariums and stuff, which was a big aesthetic in the hotel in 2077. So as I'm watching Die Hard, I'm just like, I just got done playing like 13 hours of frickin' Cyberpunk 2077. Why are there so many aesthetic overlaps between these two films, or, you know, these two pieces of media? It was very surreal. And that was when I started digging a little bit deeper. And the film is beautifully shot. I mean, I love me some cheesy 80s action films, but I thought this was going to be a B film. No. It's a top tier, you know, A+ action film. It turns out that the director of photography, let me see if I can even find Home Dude's name. Here we go. So the director of photography in Die Hard is a gentleman named Jan de Bont. And Jan de Bont also did the director of photography for Minority Report, which is just straight up a Philip K. Dick inspired cyberpunk film directed by Steven Spielberg in like 2000. And then also, get this, he worked with Peter Verhoeven. Now, for those of you who are ultra film nerds, you'll know that Paul Verhoeven, I'm sorry if I say his name crappy too, I'm not German. He directed RoboCop as well as Total Recall. So the movie that they both worked on, so Jan de Bont and Verhoeven, was Basic Instinct. Now, I'll admit, I have not seen Basic Instinct. I might have to see it at this point just to, you know, do some aesthetic research. But the fact that Jan de Bont worked on not only Die Hard, but Minority Report, and then he has a project overlapping with Peter Verhoeven, who did RoboCop and Total Recall, that says a lot to me in terms of the aesthetic language of cinema moving from a contemporary place and a place that I'll be calling Proto Cyberpunk into actual cyberpunk. So if Die Hard is Proto Cyberpunk, Total Recall is total cyberpunk. RoboCop is total cyberpunk. So I thought that was really dope and very interesting. So I'm going to go into some more cyberpunk history. This might be one of our last little tidbits for this ultra long anniversary episode. I want to talk to you guys about a little gem called Goku Midnight Eye. Now, if you go on Amazon Video Prime, you can check out this series. It's by Yoshiki Kawajiri. I'm sorry, Yoshiki. I'm sorry. That's how this white girl's gonna say your name right now. I'll spell it, okay? This guy is an anime god. We have a lot of deep love and respect for him. Anybody who's seen other classics from him, I'm gonna go from like most cyberpunk to least cyberpunk, but some of his less cyberpunk titles I know you know. So Yoshiki Kawajiri did not only Goku Midnight Eye, which is a fucking gem, but he also did Wicked City. Wicked City! Okay, for those of you who are sensitive, like trigger warning, Wicked City is insanely brutal. It's like hypersexualized, hyper-violent, can barely get through it. It's just so over the top and like, what the fuck just happened to my brain? And then you also have Ninja Scroll, which is a little bit more palatable. It's like set in feudal Japan and like some awesome ninjas, also hypersexualized and violent, but like to a little bit less of a degree than Wicked City. So probably make it through that. I also want to point out that he did a piece that I haven't seen, but it's definitely on my list. It's called Cyber City Oedo. It's Oedo 808. Looks pretty cool, very 80s style. A lot of his stuff was done in the late 80s. I feel like he started his first few anime directorial pieces in like 84 to 89. And then he just like kept going with his badassery. So in more recent years, he did a segment from the Animatrix called Program. So for those of you who are diehard Matrix fans, he did the Animatrix Program. And then also he did Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. So I was watching Goku Midnight Eye and I noticed the style of his anime, you know, like the gorgeous hyperrealism, but like stylized eyes and the very like pouty lower lash line and just super angular chins and stuff. And I thought to myself, this looks like Wicked City. So I went to Google, it confirmed my suspicion, and I went down that rabbit hole. But yeah, the guy is brilliant. He's not only a director, but he's a writer as well. And if you want to see like the most shiny form of his animation works, I would say Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, which is the second Vampire Hunter D, is some of the most slick, smooth, gorgeous, state-of-the-art anime that still has a very beautiful, old-school style. Gorgeous stuff. But if you really want that cyberpunk boner, Goku Midnight Eye is amazing. It's amazing. It's about a dude named Goku who like gets involved in this weird circumstance where he's going after like some big underground crime syndicate stuff. And he ends up having, he gouges out his left eye, trying to keep himself from being hypnotized by some peacock bitch in the first episode. Very cool. And this like mystery guy like saves him from this watery car wreck and gives him this like augmented eye. And the eye has the ability to connect to every computer system in the world, even like nuclear power systems. You know, so he could set off a bunch of missiles and end the world if he wanted to. That's a lot of trust for this guy to like give a random private eye. So that's kind of a cool pun. It's like Goku has a private eye, you know? His eye's all augmented and stuff. But it's like really just full tilt cyberpunk, no punches pulled, straight up like Johnny Mnemonic style, full bore. Super duper cyberpunk, like augmented characters, like weird engineered augmented characters. There's a hot motorcycle chick. She's got handlebars and everything. It's nuts. I'm only 2 episodes in, but each episode is an hour long. And my homie noticed that the voice actor who plays Goku is none other than the same dude who does Spike from Cowboy Bebop. You're welcome. So I think that you guys would really enjoy that. I did not come across Goku Midnight Eye on any of the lists of cyberpunk media that I've perused over the years. I have no idea why it would not be mentioned because it's brilliant. But that is some of the juicy bits I have for you. If you haven't seen Die Hard, go see Die Hard. It's a good holiday movie. Like my friend tried to tell me is not a Christmas movie, but that's a lie. It's a Christmas movie. Goku Midnight Eye is awesome. If you have a powerful enough computer or have a friend who does, like, go get yourself a Cyberpunk 2077 party. And yeah, if you want to know more about people talking to dolphins, check out the interview down below. Check out John C. Lilly's work. I'm going to cover him a little bit more in future episodes. And yeah, I just want to thank you guys for your attention span, your interest, your support. I want to tell you a little bit about what I plan on doing next year. So this has been, like I said, a very uphill battle, not in a bad way, but it's just the nature of the world at present. And next year, I would like very much to do more frequent episodes, to do more in-depth research sessions, and bring you heavy-hitting concepts, because as the world swiftly moves into what was formerly science fiction becoming reality, I feel like it's really important for us to make ourselves familiar with some of the like thought experiments that a lot of fiction writers have gifted us with their exploration of the genre. And I think it'll better prepare us to understand the implications they'll have on our real world lives. So going into this next year, we're going to do more live streams. We're going to start our interview series, which has been long awaited. We're going to have interviews from David J. Brown, as well as Danielle Bomer, an incredible artist named Paradox Palak. And he's been a mocap artist for video games. He's created like real world LARPing games. He's like the head of Alien Fight Club and a bunch of other really amazing stuff in the festival scene. He's kind of like a jack of all multimedia interactive trades. And We're also going to be having, hopefully, an interview with a friend of mine, Anson Fong from Microdose VR, an amazing VR program spearheaded by Android Jones, who is a visionary artist many of you are familiar with. And in general, we're just going to go across the gambit of a lot of really talented and influential people who are helping make this cultural exploration a reality. So stay tuned for me releasing the dates of some of those interviews. A couple of those folks are like, you know, on the docket, lying in wait for me to pounce. And some of those interviews will be in VR. So if you happen to have a headset and you want to catch one of the shows live with us, I'm hoping to more properly arrange for sort of like studio style interviews. Like imagine me as your like Conan O'Brien of VR, and you can hop into virtual reality with me and, you know, watch the interview in real time, and then it'll be syndicated later on YouTube as well as alternative media. And I will also be updating our website more often. We're still at dreamseedvr.com. I know the website's been fairly quiet this past year as I focus more on video content, but that will be changing. And as a result of all of these exciting changes, I'm gonna beseech your help again. I'm gonna ask you, if you enjoy what I do, if you want to see Dreamseed grow, if you're able to contribute anything, even if it's like $1 a month, I am running a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Seraphin. And we've got, you know, a tier that's as little as $1. You know, I've got a $5 tier and like a $15 tier. So, you know, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can make a huge difference for what I'm able to produce on my end over here as I grow this small, humble, grassroots VR magazine into a big multimedia beast that hopefully will be, I get choked up, that bridge that I was telling you about. So, thanks for watching this awesome anniversary episode. I'm really grateful. And I will catch you next time, and we'll talk more about dolphins on LSD next time.